A queen is dying. Her angry son is conspiring to thwart his planet's elections and maintain his rule. But he might not be her only heir. There may be another bearing the elusive Mark of the Crown. Qui-gon Jinn and young Obi-Wan Kenobi came to the planet of Gala as guardians of peace. Now they are facing a deadly battle for power and royal position. The true heir must be found. The Jedi must find the way.
Hello, younglings, and welcome back to the Padawan Library, the podcast where adults read Star Wars novels written for 10-year-olds. As always, I'm Assistant Librarian Levi, and with me, as always, is the busiest man in the world, Tim May. Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I don't appreciate this off-the-mic slight you're trying to pull. The busiest
I'm not
man in the
slighting
world.
you.
I apologize that I have actual responsibilities that prevent me sometimes from
just to
recording
inform
at
the
the
listeners.
exact time you want to record. This is
you rescheduled 4 times.
Okay, 2 times. I apologize. I'm
4 times.
It was not 4 times.
It
was 3 times.
The first time, listeners, this goes to show Tim's dedication to the show. It's the day of recording. I'm all set up. The mic is hot. I get a message from Tim. Yo, sorry, I didn't read the book. I've seen Alita Battle Angel in theaters 3 times.
Yeah,
now, this dates the show a little bit. Of course, this breaks the illusion that we're recording weekly. But it goes to show where Tim's alliances lie.
Well, Alita Battle Angel is a masterpiece. Please go see it.
I've seen Alita Battle Angel 2. We can talk about it after the show.
We don't need to talk about it on the air. I'm just saying. I am saying the facts. It is a masterpiece. Please go see it, everybody. So, yeah, I had to reschedule a few times. I'm so sorry. I am going to graduate school, and I am working an actual job. Unlike
I understand.
You are traveling the country with almost no responsibilities. One of us has a lot more time than the other. So I did go see Alita Battle Angel 3 times, which I guess during one of those periods I could have read the book. That's true. Anyway,
it's okay. It's all well and good. So
but you do have a lot of time. So in the downtime when I was being, in your mind, lazy, and not reading the Star Wars book for this podcast we do for no money, I believe you also read another Star Wars book by...
I did.
So let's talk to the listeners about that.
All right. I read... Now, this is what's shocking. I'm a reading novice, and the books we have been reading for this podcast have been no more than, I think Rising Force had 170 pages. That was the longest book. I read Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. I have the hardback version of this book. It's 500 pages, but this was a page-turner, people. This book was amazing. I cannot speak highly enough of this book. And I know you've read this book, too.
I read this book when it came out. It came out in the fall of 2015 in the lead-up to Force Awakens. It's actually, the actual title is Journey to Star Wars The Force Awakens, Lost Stars. It has very little to do with Force Awakens. Jakku shows up at the end, so that's how they justify it.
Right, and it's not even set in anywhere near the same time period. That's 30 years before Force Awakens. So but it does explain why the Star Destroyer is on Jakku. That's the one thing that it does Explain.
Yeah, I finished reading the book literally the day Force Awakens came out, so I was going to the movie at 7 that night for the first show, and I finished it. I was substitute teaching at a high school, and the kids were all being shockingly good and quiet, and I was able to just read the book, and it was so compelling. This book, if you guys don't know, it's by Claudia Gray, who's written a couple other Star Wars books since, and has a new one coming out. It might have already come out by the time...
Master and Apprentice.
It actually probably already came out by the time you're hearing this, but it's called Master and Apprentice, and it's actually basically a replacement for the Jedi Apprentice books that we're reading right now in the new canon, which is a little bit of a bummer, because we will get to how much I love these books, as you know. But I will say one thing. About that.
I'm excited about that book too, because Claudia Gray is an incredible writer, and she is like up there. Reading this one book of hers, and I definitely want to read her Princess Leia book. Like, I am putting her definitely like proudly on the shelf next to Jude Watson. Like, she's incredible. If anybody could pull off Qui-gon and Obi-Wan, it could be her. I believe that.
She's great, and she's written 2 books since. One is a quote-unquote adult Star Wars novel. Again, almost no Star Wars novels are really for adults, let's be real. But but that's not a shot. They can be read by adults, but you know what I mean. Kids can read any of them. Called Bloodline, that takes place 6 years before Force Awakens. That book is phenomenal. And then she wrote another book called Leia, Princess of Alderaan, that's about Leia before New Hope, which there has literally never been a novel about Leia prior to New Hope, or a comic book, or almost anything. It's insane. And that book is also great.
That's so crazy.
Both those books are phenomenal. She has a new one coming out this month. But Lost Stars, in case you don't know, the premise of this book is it's about 2 kids from the planet Jellican who essentially they grow up together and they want to be Imperial pilots. They both get into the academy, and then eventually one of them joins the Rebel Alliance, and this takes place against the backdrop of the Galactic Civil War. It starts 8 years before A New Hope, and then it ends about a year after Return of the Jedi at the actual end of the war in the new canon, which is the Battle of Jakku. You know, let's be real. Yes. The Battle of Endor is the end of the war, but you know what I mean.
Yes, I know.
And something like an anticlimax out of Return of the Jedi, but okay.
Yeah. And you've mentioned before in this podcast, like, because there was a time we talked about, like, what, like, a dream movie would be, and you mentioned just, like, something that deals with characters who are, like, not making these extraordinary decisions and movements within the story, but people who are just existing within the story of Star Wars. And this book is... These 2 characters exist within that story, and I mean, they're there for Alderaan exploding, the Death Star, they're there for Hoth, they're there for the Battle of Endor. Like, these characters deal with those, with Luke's and the rebellion and all of the decisions of the Empire. This book has, the 2 characters, of course, are Thane Kyrell and Sienna Ray, both amazing characters. And something else about them too is that, so these 2 met when they were 8 years old, and they of course ultimately, they don't realize it at first, but they end up becoming like lovers, and how, like, even though they are separated by their allegiances, they're still pulled together.
Yeah,
and it's
a wonderful
gorgeous
book, and it's like a great story about friendship and ultimately romance and all that stuff. And Claudia Gray's hinted that there's going to be a sequel for years, basically, since the book came out, and I hope that still happens at some point. I love the characters. I'd love to see what happens to them after the end of the war, because there's actually some really compelling stuff about, you know, how a decent person would be seduced by the Empire. You know, and you know,
and do you remember the character?
The character. This is a spoiler, not a spoiler. You know, whatever. The female character, Sienna Ree, she's the one who stays with the Empire and is like very gung ho by the end, and like she goes kind of crazy. It's like it's very compelling stuff. I really love this book. An interesting side note to this book: last year, they released a manga adaptation of this book.
What? I need to read that.
By the artist Yusaku Komiyama. And I have the first volume. I haven't gotten this. I think there's 3 volumes. I haven't gotten the second and third yet. But I got the first volume here in my hands, and I read it. And it's really good. The art is actually really pretty solid. Seeing like Peter Cushing drawn. By the way,
Tarkin shows
has
up.
An incredible scene at the beginning of this book.
He shows up again, and when he showed up again, I nearly cried. The way he, spoiler alert. So at the beginning of this book, the Empire arrives on Jalukan, their home planet, and both of them, Sienna and Thane, are obsessed with flying and the different ships. And when the Empire arrives, Thane kind of sneaks into a hangar to see the Imperial ships there, and that's where he meets Sienna, who's being bullied by 2 other kids, and Thane comes over and bullies them out of the way, and it's at that moment the 2 decide to become friends. And it's then at that moment that Tarkin shows up, see these 2 kids who have snuck on and are staring at the what I can't even remember. I think it's like it's an Imperial shuttle that they're looking at.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And he lets them onto the ship and shows them all around the ship. And it's like this great moment, this really great humanizing moment of Tarkin. And then later on in the book, this is before the Death Star explodes, Sienna is an Imperial lieutenant commander or something, and she sees Tarkin in a hologram, and she breaks all protocol and says, I just have to tell you, years ago, like, you showed us onto a ship, and Tarkin remembers them, and there's this like great moment where like he remembers, and it's just like, oh my god, you were one of those 2 kids, like,
and you get why he's a genius, and he's like hooking her right there. It's like she's never going to leave our grasp, because like I was able to remember this and play into your like emotion for that part of your life. So incredible stuff. That book is great.
And there's and something else I love about this book is like how it like deals with like the morality of it all. Like a lot of this, they literally witness Alderaan getting destroyed, and one of their friends, who's actually Thane's roommate in the Imperial Academy, is from Alderaan. He witnesses his planet get destroyed, and he's like, this whole time you're worried about whether or not Sienna is kind of seduced by the Empire and becomes this model, but Thane actually ends up, not Thane, Nash Windrider, who is the one from Alderaan.
Nash Windrider.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, and he is the one that kind of is like, he is destroyed by the Empire and then becomes like this ultimate Imperial. And basically the last chapter of the book deals with him and how like the Empire is going off to hiding, but they will be back, and it's kind of these emerging roots of what the First Order is going to be. So yeah, incredible stuff.
It's a wonderful book, and the reason we're talking about it here is it doesn't really fall within the purview of this podcast. It's a young adult book, which is different from a young reader's book, a junior novel. It's more for a teen audience as opposed to, we want to stay perfectly in the 7 to 11 age range for books. That sounded weird when I was saying it. So for books. Anyway,
good stuff.
It's a wonderful book, but this manga adaptation is actually a lot of fun. The art's really good. The second volume is actually not out yet. It comes out in May, so I will be picking that up. But it's worth checking out. There's some cool art. Like there's a recap of like the trilogy. There's like a few like pages that kind of recap like the setup for the Galactic Civil War that are like beautiful. Like if you're just a Star Wars fan and you want to look at some cool Star Wars art, this is a good thing to pick up. There's a lot of interest. This book, Lost Stars, written by Claudia Gray. She's become kind of the new kind of biggest recent Star Wars author. And we're going to talk after the break about maybe the most underrated of all Star Wars authors.
I know.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about... it was a mistake going off into the wilderness last week and doing Glove of Darth Vader. We're going to return and talk about Jedi Apprentice number 4, The Mark of the Crown, by Jude Watson. Stay tuned.
We now return to aquatic delicacies of the galaxy with Captain Dunwell.
Me and the crew had just passed through the Valley of Giant Oysters, a brothel 50 clicks outside of Aquarius, the underwater city of Calamari. Shut your blubbery face. I'm the captain of this vessel, and I'll call the planet whatever I done will please. Anyway, we were just pulling out of the brothel when some fishmen pigs tried to arrest me. Walladon hunting is illegal on Calamari, they said. I looked at that fishman right in the eyes, and I said, don't you know who I am? I'm Captain Dunwell, and I always get my steak done well. Then I blasted them straight to hell with my proton torpedoes. We rolled out, and we were heading back to the processing plant, and that's when I saw him. Leviathor. That tricky Walladon leader has done well at getting on my nerves.
Excuse me, Captain Dunwell. Why don't you tell the viewers at home more about the delicacies produced in your processing
Who do
plant?
you think you are interrupting me in my Dunwell stories?
Captain, I am the narrator.
Narrate this, you fishmen! Fire proton torpedoes!
We will be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Welcome back to the Padawan Library. I'm Tim May.
I'm Levi Paratic.
All right, and so we are reading. Our book this week is Jedi Apprentice number 4, The Mark of the Crown, by the great Jude Watson.
I want to say too that this book has a great cover too.
Yes.
This book, it's very hard looking. Like, you just have Qui-gon Jinn, arms out wide, and a big old glowing crown above his head. So
it's my favorite cover so far. Some of these, I think, these covers for this series are pretty hit or miss. But some of them just knock it out of the park. This one's great.
They get worse in the Jedi Quest, and then onwards into the Last of the Jedi. Like, there are some.
I think some of the Last of the Jedi's are
covers.
really cool. Like the Struzan does a few Last of the Jedi's later on.
Yeah, his are good. I think he does the last 5, and the first 5 are by another cover artist. But there is this one that looks absolutely abysmal. We'll get into that at some point in this show.
All right, so. The cover art, by the way, is by Cliff Nielsen, and the design is by Madalena Stefan. So props to them. The design, I assume is probably mostly the logo and stuff. But, yeah, Cliff Nielsen, killing it. So the last book, The Hidden Past, we both gave a very positive notice to. Because I think we both said it's our favorite of the series so far, correct?
Yes.
And that book was great, and it dealt with a lot of things kind of at final. It really fully formed the Qui-Gon Obi-Wan relationship, although there's still some tension there in this book. And it kind of set up this book pretty well, because they were at the beginning of that book, they were on their way to the mission that is depicted in book 4. They got sidetracked with, what's his name?
Guerrera.
Guerrera, my homie.
And Paxi, the Deirdre brothers, legends.
Not so. This book, The Mark of the Crown, it comes out in 1999. We're still in 99. These books are coming out like that every other month, basically, from Phantom Menace on. So we're moving at a clip here, and Chapter 1, the book starts off, and Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they arrive on Gala, which is the planet they were headed to. And remember, the Prince Beju in the previous book was a bit of a nuisance. But they're in the city Galu, the capital city, and they're there, if you remember, to assist in their first ever freely held election. Prince Beju is like the heir to the throne, and he's mad, obviously, about this because he has to now run to be the governor of this planet when he would have just inherited it. And he's running against two people, Deca Brun. Deca Brun. Great name. Deca Brun is, when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon show up, he's holding a rally downtown. And then supporters of the other candidate, Willa Promi, come and they disrupt the Deca rally, and the two sides, they start fighting. And
they get caught in the middle.
And they get caught in the middle, but they're like, let's keep it moving. We just got to get to the palace. We can't interfere here. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan in the first chapter also, they kind of get into a conversation about how, Qui-Gon doesn't necessarily believe that Beju's actions in the previous book, where he, screwed with, what was the planet called? The Findians, right?
Findar, and
Findar.
He was screwing around with the Syndicate.
The Syndicate and Findar and Bacta and all that stuff. You go back and listen to episode 3 to really get that. But he doesn't believe it was supported by the Queen, Vita, his mother. So he wants him and Obi-Wan to stay quiet about all that. But anyway, they kind of escape through the crowd, the fighting crowds, and on their way to the palace.
And at the end of this chapter here, Qui-Gon has what I think is a very funny line here. The road to democracy can be a rough one, Qui-Gon observed as they hurried past. But on Gala, it seems to be rougher than most.
Actually, I want to say something. Qui-Gon also says something that's a great just Jedi line. I don't remember the exact context. Obi-Wan says something, that he expects something to happen. I don't remember it. But then Qui-Gon says, count on nothing, only change. Hard. Anyway.
I agree. All right. So they meet with the Queen Vita, and when they meet with her, Qui-Gon notices something immediately. He notices her living force, or lack thereof, and he guesses that she is dying, which she quickly, because she notices him staring at her, she's like, you're right, I am currently dying. And so basically she knows she's dying. They don't know what she's dying of. They can't figure it out. And she is afraid that if the dynasty of the Tala, which is her husband, King Kana, was a member of this dynasty. They have ruled for 1,000 years, and things have been falling apart on the planet. Like most of the planets that we encounter in these books, there is a large wealth gap between the royals and the actual population of the planet. So she wants to leave a legacy by instilling democracy on her planet. That's her dying wish, is for democracy.
And the legacy, that word you said, is very important. We'll keep coming back to that word, legacy, throughout this discussion.
Yes, very, very important. So she knows that this whole quest for democracy is going to be hard won. She talks immediately about her son, Prince Beju, who she knows is going to be trouble. She knows that he will lie, cheat, and steal his way to the top. He's angry with her, so she already feels like she's betrayed him, but she is not backing any other candidate in the election. She also tells us about the other candidates in the election. Deca Brun, who he is promising to redistribute wealth to everybody on the planet, and he's making these bold claims that aren't necessarily going to be easy to actually accomplish. Flesh. And then Willa Prammy, she was an underminister at the palace, so she has years of experience, like, actually in the palace, and her ideas are a little more grounded with reality, but people don't necessarily care for her bluntness. So think of her as like a Hillary Clinton kind
Exactly, I was going to say, there's a very 2016 primary thing, although some revelations later in the book make it maybe more of a 2016 general election thing, if you know what I mean. So...
And then she says, but there's a wild card, people. And Obi-Wan's, well, who is this wild card? And she says, Elon. And he's like, well, who's Elon? And she goes to talk about how when the dynasty took over years ago, a group of people known as the Hill People did not observe the monarchy and did not want to be ruled by the monarchy. So they went into the hills. And her husband, King Kana, they had an arranged marriage, and unknowing to her before they were married, before the two of them had even met, King Kana had secretly married a woman from the Hill People, in which they conceived a child, and this was
married
disaster.
A Hill person?
Yes. And the ministers, the council ministers were like, no, you cannot have this. We must dissolve this marriage. So he went with them. They dissolved the marriage, and she went back to the hills, and he didn't know that she was with child. This child is Elon, who is now the leader of the Hill People. And King Kana confessed this to Queen Vita a month before he died. He was weighing on him his entire life. He felt so bad about this. This woman was his first love, and he wanted his wife to know the truth. And now his wife wants Elon to know the truth, that she is the rightful heir to the throne, not Beju. Let's see.
And she has
and
the mark of the crown.
The mark of the crown. We're not exactly sure what that means. We know that it is not an actual mark on the body. Only council ministers can identify it. So I guess we're going to find out what exactly the mark of the crown is. So one of the also things too is she was the one who wanted the Jedi to come. She had to argue with the other council members for them to arrive. And she had to make an agreement. The Jedi could arrive, but they are not allowed to leave the city. And it's at this moment, things are kind of wrapping up here, is when Prince Beju walks in, and he demands immediately, he's like, these two are liars, get them out of here. Chapter 3.
So yeah, and Beju comes in, and he's with a tall, bald, robed man. Who is presumably a council person. And Beju, he tells kind of his bullshit version of the story of the last book. He's saying, oh, well, you know, the Jedi, they sowed discord on Findor, and they're trouble. They're not here to help. And, of course, Queen Vita is like, listen, child, like, they helped free a people from an oppressive corporation that owned their lives. Like, this is not, they're not sowing discord, you know, we all know who really is, if you know what I mean. So, and then Qui-Gon, you know, he barely protests this, though. He's not responding in any big way. He says, I remember things differently, but, you know, if that's how you feel, you want us to leave, we will leave, you know. And, the tall guy is revealed to be Lonag Giba. He's the head of the Council of Ministers, and he suggests he's very suspicious of them. He's saying, you know, well, I was fine with them coming until these accusations from Prince Beju, and so, but he's like he wants to accede to the Queen a little bit because the Queen wants them there. So he's saying, you know, he suggests an escort for the Jedi at all times if they go outside the palace. So, Vita agrees to the terms, as long as they give the Jedi the escort Jono Dunn, who is a very young boy, about Obi-Wan's age, and apparently very small and shrimpy, you know. So, Giba and Beju, they're pissed about this, of course. They're just like, ugh, this little shrimp, nice try, basically. So, Qui-Gon just leaves the room. Obi-Wan follows, and Qui-Gon is kind of like out of the picture. And we normally alternate chapters here a little bit, and I'm not taking over here, but Chapter 4, I just want to say this. Chapter 4 is just one of the finest moments in Star Wars literature I've ever read. And I want to read. I would like to read the first couple pages if you're okay with that.
Go right ahead, because I was going to do the same thing.
Okay, I made note of it, and this is incredible. So on page 25, if you have the book at home, you can read along.
Follow along.
So page 25 through about 27, first half of 27. So here we are. Legacy. The words struck a chord in Qui-Gon. He needed time to consider why it had lodged so deep within him. He took the exterior stairway to the gardens below. Obi-Wan would no doubt make his way to their quarters. Trees were bursting with fruit, or were in blossom within the palace walls. Qui-Gon recognized a few, Muja and Tango. Masses of white, red, purple, and yellow marked the flower gardens beyond. The palace was famous for its extensive gardens. Qui-Gon knew that every plant, tree, and flower native to Gala was represented here. He strolled in the orchards. The Muja trees were in blossom, and every sudden breeze sent a shower of pink petals drifting to the grass below. The queen had spoken of her legacy. Dying, she considered what she wished to leave behind. Her first thought was for her son. She even felt a bond with a stepchild she had never known. The Galatians were a people of strong family bonds. Jobs and land were often passed down from parent to child. Marriages were carefully chosen to strengthen the family. Qui-Gon had given up family and children for the life of a Jedi. He had chosen freely. No Jedi was bound to the life. He could choose to leave it at any time. Yet he knew he would not. Qui-Gon leaned down to pick up petals from the grass. He let them drift through his fingers to be carried by the wind. This would be his life, he thought. He would wander the galaxy. He would risk his life on behalf of strangers. What would he leave behind? Qui-Gon's wandering took him to the kitchen gardens. Signs of planting surrounded him. Shovels and rakes, careful rows of tiny seedlings taking root in the dirt. He looked down at the ground, almost surprised to see his own footprints there. Wind and rain would soon wash them away. Ilan had chosen to live apart from society. She followed a set of laws that belonged to no government, no world, only her fellow travelers. She was like him, he realized. He had never met her, but he knew her. Qui-Gon? He turned at the sound of Obi-Wan's voice. The boy looked hesitant, afraid to disturb him. You disappeared, Obi-Wan said. I didn't know where to look. Qui-Gon could not share his thoughts. Obi-Wan was young, just starting out his journey as a Jedi. He would not understand thoughts of legacies, of what he would leave behind. Not yet. So, this book. So this book is really very much about kind of legacies and about family and found values,
heritage,
inherited value, and this is like this is what I want, Star Wars. I want Star Wars to explore real themes that people really do care about. I mean, it's very explicit. It's talking explicitly about what the theme is, legacy. Just it starts the chapter off. It's very simple and direct, but it's beautiful. So I apologize. That's how that chapter starts off. What happens?
But you know what, though? Let's stop and appreciate that the fact that this book, which could have easily been a throwaway for Scholastic, these book series could have been tossed to anybody. Just churn these books out. Let's make a buck. Jude Watson took this, ran with it. This book has themes in it. Like, how incredible is that this book, which retailed for what, $4.99 US, $5.99 Canada?
I get it for $3 in a Scholastic book order.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the Jude put so much work into these books. Like, we truly do not deserve this much work into these books, but she does it, and I appreciate her so much for that. It's just like, it tickles me how good these books are.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason for it.
Like, I just read a pretty extended selection from this book, and it's just, like, I did it not just because, like, it's an important part of the book, and, our listeners that haven't read the books should know about that, but it's also just a wonderful piece of writing, which is not something you can say for books that are written for this age group very often, directly for this age group, and in this kind of mass market way. So, and especially a book that's like also a licensed title. It's not even like an original property. So, just incredible work by Jude. So,
So anyway, Obi-Wan catches up with him, and they discuss whether or not they believe Queen Vita is telling the truth. Does Queen Vita want Elon to know that she is the true heir to the crown so that she can come and assume the throne? Or does she want her to know so that she can come and then they can snuff her out so that Beiju is the rightful heir to the throne? They're not sure, but Qui-Gon believes the queen. But Qui-Gon, he is already constant rule breaker here. He is going to leave to go to the hills to find Elon. And Obi-Wan is protesting this, but Master, we have a mission here to oversee these elections. And this is how the chapter closes. He walked closer to Obi-Wan and rested his hand gently on his shoulder for a moment. Don't worry, Padawan. You can handle the mission here until I return. Be alert for the palace intrigue. For palace intrigue. Qui-Gon keen gaze swept the palace. Trust no one here. There is a disturbance in the Force, and I don't know where exactly it lies. Obi-Wan looked at him frustrated. But what will I tell them when they ask where you are? Instead of answering, Qui-Gon strode through the half-planted gardens back to the trees. As he walked, he reached up and swiped a piece of ripe fruit from the branch over the head. Without turning, he tossed it over his shoulder. He didn't have to turn. He knew his Padawan would catch it. It's simple, he called behind him. Tell him I'm still here.
Oh, that moment is great. I could just picture...
I know.
I love these books. They add so much. I love the relationship between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in Phantom Menace is great, and I was always really attached to those characters, and I always wanted more with them. And I read I think a couple of these books when they were new, but I really regret not just keep going with them. And I'm happy we're doing it now because these really add so much richness and texture to the characters, and I appreciate it. So moving on, Obi-Wan, he winds up having to lie about this for several days. It's a little bit unclear whether it's a few days or even a week or two, but he's lying to everybody about where Qui-Gon is, and he's telling them, oh, he's out in the garden, he's he's meditating, whatever. And he's telling this to, Beiju and to, what's his name again? Giba? Jiba, I'm not sure. But anyway, and Jono, who is assigned to him, he brings him food every morning, including food for Qui-Gon. And Jono actually is the first person to to tell Obi-Wan that he's noticed. Basically, he kind of gets a little suspicious. He's like, oh, I haven't seen Qui-Gon around, whatever. But then they kind of get to talking, and Jono had a similar upbringing to Obi-Wan. They bond over their upbringings, and that Jono has been at the palace since he was a small child. He's been away from his family, who are farmers, rich farmers apparently, according to him anyway. And Qui-Gon, not Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, of course, had left his family at an extremely young age and chose to live the life of a Jedi. So at the temple, so they feel like they have this home that doesn't necessarily always feel like home, but has become that kind of de facto. So they kind of bond over that and they become friends, And Obi-Wan actually has some interior monologue here where he reflects on legacy in a similar way to Qui-Gon, and he also is like, oh, Qui-Gon won't understand this sort of thing. He's so entrenched in the Jedi ways that he doesn't understand how I feel about these kind of giving up that chance to have that kind of impact on people that
and what I want to say here about Jude Watson too is that the fact that Obi-Wan is also having these feelings of legacy but doesn't feel like an adult would understand them. she's done an excellent job at adapting Obi-Wan into a 13-year-old boy. Yes. He doesn't have he doesn't have all the answers yet. He's not that cool, calm demeanor that we have in episode 1. He still has a lot to learn, and he's still just like a young boy questioning his place in all of this.
But he's also still recognizable. He's not just a generic 13-year-old. Like, you can tell this guy grows up to be the Obi-Wan Kenobi we all know. So at this point, Obi-Wan, he befriends Jono, and they go and do these inspections of polling places and stuff together. They're overseeing the election while Qui-Gon's off doing whatever, we don't know. But, and so, Obi-Wan then, he sees Queen Vita at one point, in the gardens, and, he sees her, and she's very frail. She's kind of sitting as the evening, sun setting, and they start to talk, and she kind of talks really frankly about her illness, how she feels, worse at night. She gets worse at night, and she talks about this country house that the royal family owns. That when she first was feeling sick, she went out there and she felt a lot better, but now she's back here and she's not feeling well anymore, and all of her advisors are saying she's too sick to travel, so she can't go back out there where she was able to kind of get better. And Obi-Wan, he kind of puts a few things together, and he starts to suspect maybe she's being poisoned, because she wasn't around the ministers, she wasn't around all this stuff, and that's where that and so it ends on the suspicion. And I forgot to mention one thing. Jono also talks about how Deca Brun, running for the governor, he wants him to win. He thinks he's going to win. And he's going to bring a lot of prosperity to Gala. So, but anyway, Obi-Wan, he suspects foul play is at hand with Queen Vita.
Yes, and he knows that he needs to act quickly if this theory is true. So he goes to the Queen's quarters in the evening, and Jono meets him there, and he says, "Oh, may I talk to the Queen?" And the Queen, she's having her tea and little, pastries, and he believes that since she gets ill at night, she says that she has intense pains at night that she can't sleep because of them, that the poison may be in this meal that she's receiving here. So Obi-Wan plays it very coy. Jono's out of the room. And he's like, "Oh, Queen Vita, your tea here, it's almost gone and it's cold. Would you like me to fetch you another?" And she goes, "Oh, no, that's fine. I'm good for the night. I'm going to retire." So Obi-Wan takes the tray and quickly rushes it back to his room. And he has an empty vial in his Jedi med pack. And he puts the tea in there, and he takes the little pastries and he puts them in a Ziploc bag, I guess. And so the next day he's out with Jono, and they are inspecting the polling places. So basically what Obi-Wan has to do is go into the polling places, check the voting machines, and make sure that there's no foul play at work here. So they go up to one, and he says, "Jono, could you wait outside?" And he goes, "Well, I'm supposed to follow you around everywhere you go." And he goes, "Well, I don't want the people to see that you are a palace worker here and that you are trying to have influence over the polling place." And Jono goes, "Well, you are right about that. We want a fair election." So Obi-Wan goes in the polling place, but quickly he sneaks out the back door, and he goes to essentially a phone book, and looks up a substance analyzer, realizes there's one nearby, and this is where we are introduced to Molly Erat, and he is this
my prince,
substance.
Molly Erat, #1 character.
And he is like this crazy scientist. Obi-Wan knocks on the door. There's no answer. The door opens. He sees there's boxes piled to the ceilings, spreadsheets all over the floors. And Molly sees him and he goes, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "Oh, I'd like to have some substance analyzed." And he's just like, "Oh, well, luckily you came to a substance analyst." And he gives Obi-Wan like a really hard time, calls Obi-Wan impatient, but he analyzes the little cakes first, and he says, "Yep, they're cake." And then he pops one into his mouth and he eats it, and he's just like, "So why are you here?" And Obi-Wan's like, "Well, I'm looking for poison." And Molly's just like, "Oh, it was a good thing the poison wasn't in the little cakes there." So he analyzes the tea, and he notices that there's something there. He can't figure out what it is, but he says it's not supposed to be in tea. But he needs time to figure out what it is. So Obi-Wan leaves there. There is something wrong with the Queen's tea. We don't know if it's poison or not, but it's enough to confirm his suspicions. So he goes back to meet with Jono, and this part here is like really, he feels bad that he took so long, and he says, "Sorry to take so long," Obi-Wan told Jono. "There were a few problems, nothing major." Jono jumped down from his perch. "I knew you would return. It's all right. I'm used to waiting. I have waited for a friend for a long time, Obi-Wan."
Touching.
Oh.
Anyway, so we'll come back to that, but meanwhile, Qui-Gon, he got a ride out of the city. This is, flashing back a little bit. He got a ride out of the city, but he's been traveling alone to try to find the hill people through kind of difficult weather. Snow, sleet, all that kind of stuff. He gets cold. And but on his way, he's been traveling for 3 days, I think it says, and a group of bandits on speeder bikes and swoop bikes, they attack him. They're wearing kind of black headdress around their faces, and Qui-Gon kind of deals with them one by one. It's a difficult thing. He has to jump up on these landing rocks, I think is what they call them, and to try to avoid them. He's able to deal with them one by one, but he kind of gets overwhelmed and he's worn down. And there's one kind of final swoop bike person who gets to him, and he turns off the lightsaber and he kind of gives in. He just tells this person what his mission is. He wants to find Alan and the hill people, and that bandit removes her headdress and reveals herself to be Elan. This was a pretty cool. This was actually a pretty cool action sequence. Like they have like these. I love the swoop bikes. They're some of my favorite Star Wars vehicles, and they figure very prominently in this book. But this sequence was really cool. Jude Watson's actually really pretty solid at a direct, clear action that still uses some fun turns of phrase, and I appreciate that.
Yes. She, you can, while reading these books, you can easily imagine all of the action going on. Like, these play like movies in your head. That's what makes these books so exciting, and it's so, again, bowing down to Jude. So anyway, we meet Elan, and she tosses aside her headdress and bowcaster. That's right, she's so hard she uses a bowcaster. And she's given Qui-Gon a hard time about how they nearly destroyed the standing stones. Apparently they are symbols for the people that they build those. So hang on, what was so she's given Qui-Gon a hard time because the standing stones are sacred to the hill people, and Qui-Gon nearly destroyed them in this whole big old battle with the bandits. He apologizes, but she asks him why he's there, and he says, "Well, I'm here on behalf of the Queen," and she said, well, then you can just turn right around because I want nothing to do with the Queen. However, Qui-Gon did sustain some injuries during his battle with the bandits. A rock was blasted and it exploded into his chest and it injured his leg and his back. And there's a character here that comes over who is named
Dana.
Where is it? Dana. And Dana is just like, there's a big storm rolling in here. You can't just leave this guy out here. He's gonna die. So Elon agrees, okay, you can stay for one night, hop on the back of my swoop. If you fall off, I'm not coming back to get you again. So you can just picture Qui-Gon holding on to her for dear life. So the hill people people in Gala want to believe that these people are uncivilized creatures. They put Qui-Gon up in this nice domed house that has kitchen, bathroom, heat, fur rugs. He even has his own data pad to use.
I want to say
there.
something for all my Dragon Ball heads. This is like a capsule house. Move on.
Okay, all right. So the healer is apparently coming. So he treats his wounds, he treats his chest, he treats his leg, but he's still got this wound on his back that he just can't reach. So he's waiting for the healer to show up. The healer shows up, and it is Elon, and he's shocked to see her. And there's this great moment here where she says, "Surprised? Not the healing she says, surprised I'm not the healing type, that is?" And he says, "No, it's not that," Qui-Gon answered. "I've just never known a healer who could pilot a swoop like that before." So they have this nice little back and forth together. So she treats his wounds, and he finally tells her what his whole purpose there is. He tells her about the fact that she is the true heir to the throne, that King Kano was her father. She says that, no, my father was a healer here in the hills. My mother never, ever left the city. This cannot be true. She rejects this. And Qui-Gon's trying to reason with her. It's like, I believe you have big pull in the election. The Queen wanted you to know this. She's dying. She's thinking of her legacy. This is the gift she gives to you. And this is a passage. And if we start here with Elon. "I don't believe it, and I don't want it," Elon firmly answered. "This is my legacy." She gestured to take in the dome and all that was outside of it. "These are my people. We are all outcast. You've seen how Gala is ruled by powerful families. The hill people began 100 years ago with those who were different, whose eyes were too dark, whose skin was too dark, who had no family. They took refuge here. We made our own society, and freedom is our first rule. My parents gave me this heritage. I am proud of it, and I don't want any crown." "You make a large decision in a very short time," Qui-Gon observed. Her dark eyes studied him. "And what is it to you, Qui-Gon Jinn?" she asked softly. "You have come a long way, almost lost your life, but to tell me this? But Gala is not your world. It is not your people. I have ties to something. Do you? Why should I listen to you talk of legacies from someone who has no ties?" Qui-Gon fell silent. Elon was trying to wound him. Something of what she said merely echoed in his own thoughts.
This
Great.
This book is it's obviously very maniacally focused on this theme, and I want to say something, because we were talking about, these books didn't need to have this. This is what good children's literature does, though, and children's stories in general do, is they do pick a very big theme, a theme that can kind of be directly discussed in the text, but they examine it from several different angles, and they make the audience kind of think about the idea, perhaps for the first time. And when we say this book didn't need to be this good, it's not because it's for children. Like, children deserve these sorts of stories, and this book is for children. Like, we are enjoying it as adults, but it's perfectly. It's not like Marvel Comics or something where like they're not even trying to appeal to children anymore. Like, this book works for its intended audience, but it's just rich enough that you can continue to find something in it even as an older reader. So I want to make that clear.
Yeah, these books would have sold regardless of how good they were.
That's
So
what we're
that's
talking
why
about. We're talking about the market, really, when we say they didn't have to be good. It's not the audience.
So, and then, so Qui-Gon changes the subject after this, and he wants to contact Qui-Gon. They explain that they jam their communications in the hills for their protection, but as soon as this storm lets up, we will let you contact your Padawan. So chapter 9.
At this point, we move back to Obi-Wan, and the next morning he receives a call from Qui-Gon, and they catch each other up on everything that's been going on, just with both of them. And so Obi-Wan tells Qui-Gon that, I believe the Queen's been poisoned, all this stuff, and Qui-Gon is like, okay, well, who is feeding her? Jono, that's suspect number one. Basically, he says he thinks he could be the poisoner, and he brings because he brings the Queen her tea. Obi-Wan's mad about this because he's made a friend with Jono, and Obi-Wan's made a lot of friends that Qui-Gon's been kind of disapproving of, and it's turned out that Qui-Gon was wrong. Like, Guerrera to some degree, although Guerrera did some dubious stuff too. But in this moment, he's suspicious of Qui-Gon's judgment of his friends. And he's annoyed, and he's like, okay, well, what about this Elan person? You say that she's a healer, she knows how to deal with herbs and that kind of stuff. Maybe remotely she's kind of sending the poison to the palace. And Qui-Gon's like, that's a fucking stretch, my boy. But Qui-Gon's like, I'll be back in a few days. Obi-Wan's mad about that. He tells Obi-Wan, that he should tell the Queen about his suspicions, and they hang up. And then Obi-Wan, immediately after he gets off out of the communication, he runs into Jono, and so he's like, well, maybe I shouldn't trust this guy, because he might be a spy after all, ?
So Obi-Wan knows that, okay, so this theory of the Queen being poisoned may ring true, so he has to act fast. So he runs into the Queen's quarters the next morning. She is having a glass of tea, and Obi-Wan runs over and smacks it out of her hand, and the glass shatters on the ground. This is another example of why I think this adaptation of a 13-year-old Obi-Wan is so great, because he doesn't have the niceties that Qui-Gon does. A 13-year-old boy just ran into the Queen's room and smacked a glass right out of her hand, and then he blurts out, "I think you're being poisoned." And she's just like, "What?" And so in this moment, Beiju and Giba come in, and they are like, "You have to be kidding me, you're being poisoned." And then Giba's just like, "This is ridiculous. Not only that, I'm asking where the other Jedi is all the time, and you always have an excuse. I think you're lying. There's lies and deceit all over the place here." So finally, Obi-Wan has to just come out and say, he's not here. He has gone to the hills to find Elin. And they're just like, well, that's ridiculous. Why would they do that? And Obi-Wan worded that so he didn't, blurt out the half-sister part. But it's at this moment that the Queen figures that it is time that Beiju knows the truth. So I'm going to read a passage here. Start here with the Queen. "Because she's your half-sister," Queen Vita replied to him, "it's time you knew. Your father had a early marriage and a child. He divorced his wife and abandoned the child. The decision haunted him." "I don't believe it." Prince Beiju shook his head. "Now you're lying. Father would not act so dishonorably. Family is the cornerstone of life on Gala. How often he said that. He would not disgrace the Talon name by marrying a hill person, and he would not abandon this child. You know this." "I'm sorry to tell you this, Beiju," Queen Vita said gently. "It is true. He regretted it, and he wanted to make it right." "You defile the father's memory," Prince Beiju whispered in horror. I shouted that. You will go to any length to shame me. The queen turned to Gibba. Tell him, she begged. You were there. You know it's true. Gibba shook his head. I'm sorry, queen. I would do anything for your highness, except lie for you. The queen staggered back. Obi-Wan moved forward to support her. Now I see it all, Prince Beju raged. You are in league with the Jedi. You have conspired against me. You will do whatever it takes to make sure I do not gain the crown. No, Beju, my son, Queen Vita said weakly. No! I am calling the guards, Prince Beju said. And it's at this moment the queen looks at Obi-Wan and she's just like, run. And Obi-Wan runs.
So, before I begin on the next part of the book, I also want to make note, hill people is interesting. And it's them calling the city people calling them hill people is one thing. They call themselves hill people. It just seems very derogatory, but whatever. Anyway, Obi-Wan, he's running, so, and Jono catches up with him right away.
So, real quick right here, I have a note. If these chapters were named, this chapter should be called Chapter 11, The Other Foot Drops.
Oh, I like that. So Obi-Wan, he's running away, and Jono, he catches up with him, and Obi-Wan, he decides to trust Jono, who suggests going to see Deca Brun. He'll know what to do, basically, is what he's saying. So they go to Deca's campaign headquarters, and they, Jono's really chummy with some of the campaign workers. It's like a real campaign headquarters. They're like, oh, the rally's over here, and like all this stuff, or at least, and I've been in a lot of campaign headquarters, so it's very, it's like a very like movie idea of what a campaign headquarters is, which I like because it's Star Wars. So it's not just depressing and sitting and calling people and having them hang up on you. Anyway, so they go, and so they're gonna set up a meeting with Deca, and they're like, "Oh well, Deca, he's busy, but they can tell Jono's serious." While they're waiting, though, Obi-Wan sees a kind of a file on a screen or something. I don't remember the exact thing. I'm sorry here. Whatever. He sees a file that details. It's an open document, and it details campaign contributions from Off-World.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, long-time listeners, long-time readers, you will know that Off-World is the evil mining company from the first book in this series, The Rising Force, and
also in book 2.
Also in book 2, and it's kind of the head of Off-World.
The Dark Rival.
The Dark Rival. The head of Off-World is Xanatos, Qui-Gon's former apprentice, who is now who fell to the dark side, and who will stop at nothing to seek his vengeance on Qui-Gon. So the fact is that Off-World, they are giving Deca Brun campaign contributions through seemingly legitimate companies on Gala. So, and the idea being to essentially create a mining colony on half the planet on kind of the sea. What's the sea called again?
Oh, this is the Galatian Sea.
The Galatian Sea, of course. Okay.
The largest source of fresh water on the planet, and also home to a few remaining sea people.
Yeah, I'd love to meet those sea people someday.
I know, right?
So anyway, Obi-Wan's, being suspicious, looking at all this stuff, taking in all this information, and some shady characters confront him, and they force him into a walk-in freezer and lock the door.
They take his lightsaber and his comlink
yes,
too.
Of course.
Yeah.
I apologize. Yes.
So Obi-Wan, this seems to be a recurring element in these books. Obi-Wan seems to always get captured somehow. That seems to be ongoing in these books, but it's still a lot of fun. So we jump back to the hills, previously on the hills. Qui-Gon wakes up and he knows that he's going to be asked to leave today. So he's just like, all right, I got to play this right. I need to stay around longer. I have to convince, I'm not leaving here failing my mission. I want Elend to come back with me to Gala. So he meets up with her and he's just like, oh, I'm not healed enough, and she's just like, nice try. Here's some more ointment. Put this on it. Get out of here. I'm going to give you a swoop. You can just swoop your way back to Gala.
Oh, there's a storm coming, Annie. I can feel it in my bones. He tries that.
Yes. Yeah. He tries the storm coming, and they hear a thunderous noise, and he's just like, oh, that's the storm. But then it happens again, and they know immediately that's no storm. Tanks. They run outside, and the Royal Guard, the Gala Royal Guard, has sent a whole army, I guess, of proton tanks, and they are there to destroy the village. Elon starts calling orders. Everybody who's not an elder or a child, get to your swoop. Elders and child, go to safety. They need to lead them away from the village to protect the elders and the young children. Elon goes, look, I know I promised you a swoop, but I need all of them right now. And it's at this moment, Qui-Gon, he activates his lightsaber and says, no, I am standing with your people. She's like, all right, get on a swoop. So he hops on the swoop. I know, right? So so they have everybody together on the swoops, and Elon mentions that they're taking them to Moonstruck Pass. And another hill person, I guess, gives Elon a look like Hillstruck Pass, and she's just like, let's go. So there's a funny moment here where Qui-Gon is trying to get used to riding a swoop. He's never done it before. He nearly spins out of control, but somebody shouts, you gotta lean against the turns. So once he figures that out, that force ability of his, he is an expert rider. So right off the bat, Elon and Dana lead one of the tanks into the woods where it crashes into a ravine. They gang back up together and they lead them into Moonstruck Pass, and it's a pass between two mountains, and Qui-Gon is really worried here because the walls are getting closer and closer together, and he is afraid that Elon has made a mistake and that they are going to lead themselves into a trap and that they will be cornered by the tanks. But it's at that moment that the tanks suddenly, because it had just snowed the night before, the ground gives out underneath the tanks and they drop into the snow. Because Elon knew that the storm came out of like the southwest, the winds were blowing out of the south, and would cause snow drifts, deep snow drifts that the swoops would fly over, but the tanks would crumble underneath them. So that's chapter 12.
So yeah, it's incredible, this incredible maneuver in the canyon. It had these large snowbanks, and they kind of cushion the fall for the tanks, so there's not actually a huge amount of casualties, and Elon, orders a rescue plan to get all the tanksmen, and they bring all the tanksmen back to the village and they heal their wounds, and Qui-Gon is obviously very impressed by this compassion that Elon shows, and he talks to a hill person elder named Domi, who tells him about Elon's parents. Her father, that she knew anyway, was Roi, I don't know, a healer, and a very respected healer, and her mother was Tima or Tema, I'm not sure, who traveled, and Domi says that Tema, she traveled to Galu when she was younger, and Qui-Gon's like, where have I heard of this before? So Qui-Gon, he talks to one of the officers from the Royal Guard, and this officer, he's shocked by the Hill people's kindness, and he tells, he's like, oh, they lied about these people for my whole life, basically, that they were these monstrous, savage people, and so he tells Qui-Gon that the orders came from Giba himself, not Beju, and Qui-Gon is like, shit, I gotta get a hold of Obi-Wan. He can't reach him. So he's like, I have to return. So he tells Elon about Giba and the orders, and it's at this moment that he really convinces her to return to Gala with him. And I'm going to read a little bit here from page 98. Sorry, 1 second here. Yeah. So... this is good. Let's see here. I know you lied to your mother, Qui-Gon said quietly. She worked at the palace. Can you admit the possibility that the Queen is telling the truth? I fear she is being punished because she shared that truth with me, and with you. Ilan turned her face away. She stared at the trees. Gala will fall without you, he said. I must return. Come with me. Take a stand. Ilan's eyes were stormy as she turned back to face him. I will not be a princess, she warned. Nor should you be, Qui-Gon replied. Ilan is enough.
Whew.
Whew, that is good as hell. This book rules.
I agree. All right. A dramatic wipe back to the freezer. Obi-Wan is so cold he can barely feel his feet. He's got his boots off. He's rubbing his feet, puts his boots back on, and he pulls out the rock that Obi-Wan, that Qui-Gon gave Obi-Wan on his 13th birthday, this rock from Qui-Gon's home planet that was in Book 3, and he's holding it, feeling its warmth, and he sends out a message through the Force to Qui-Gon that, I'm in trouble, Master, come back. And he hears a commotion outside the freezer. And what the commotion is he hears somebody show up and say, oh, I got this big old pallet of meat that needs to go in the freezer ASAP. And the guard's like, no, nobody comes in and out. And so Obi-Wan, he's got his ear against the freezer door. He focuses on the Force and he says to himself, then again, we all need to eat. And then the guard says, well, then again, we all need to eat. Don't move. I'll push it inside. And so Obi-Wan here.
Can we pause for a second here?
Yes.
You guys can tell that I'm very, very excited about this book. I thought this was a little bit strange and dubious that apparently 13-year-old Obi-Wan Kenobi is so adept at the Force that he can do Jedi mind tricks without even speaking through walls to people he can't even look in the eye. Like, we see Alec Guinness, he has to look at those stormtroopers in the eye in order for the mind trick. I don't know if that's like the rule, but it seems a little goofy, that's all I'm saying.
You know what, here though, I'm going to argue this because I rewatched Force Awakens last night, and Rey, who has just discovered her Force abilities.
Oh, don't be one of these people.
She isn't even looking at the stormtrooper who's right behind her. Daniel Craig is the stormtrooper, and she mind tricks him immediately. It's her first day out of the gate with the Force, and she pulls it off.
I mean, yeah. I just think it's mostly the through the wall part. I wouldn't care. I wouldn't blink an eye if he could do it at all. That's not. It's just weird that she's able to do it like without even looking at him. That seems strange to me. That he's able to do it. I'm sorry. Rey, I have no problem with. Let's make it clear we are not one of those podcasts.
Well, I mean, he did see the guard coming in, so like he knows what the guard looks like.
That's
so maybe
true.
he visualized the guard.
I'm not mad about it. I thought it was interesting. I was like, this is a bit of a leap. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, they had to get Obi-Wan out somehow. This is like
it's perfectly
when
fine.
Obi-Wan. Was like when Obi-Wan was going to blow himself up in the Dark Rival. It's a way out. It's not the best solution in the world, But so anyway, the guard pushing the meat pallet opens the door, and Obi-Wan charges the other side of the meat pallet and rams the guard up against the wall. And surprise, the delivery boy is Jono. And they're just like, all right, we got to get out of here. So they run out. Obi-Wan's like, but wait, I need my lightsaber and comlink. And Jono's like, we don't have time. We have to. Beiju has imprisoned the queen, and she is refusing to eat. I'm afraid she'll die if we don't get there. So they run out, and it should be also noted that this is Election Day. The stakes have never been higher. And they're running, and Obi-Wan goes, wait, I have to go back to the substance analyzer. If the queen is being poisoned, I need to know what the poison is to figure out if there is an antidote. So we go back to Molly's place. And Molly... Yeah, my boy Molly. And Molly, he goes, there's a reason why I couldn't find this unknown chemical in the tea. Because it's not a chemical, it's a natural substance. And it is a... where is it? It is an herb that grows in the seaplains of Gala. A pinch or two is harmless, but the local people know that if it's dried and used in certain concentrations, it mimics the effects of a wasting disease, ultimately fatal, of course. It grows in the seaplains of Gala and probably in the palace gardens.
It's called Dimelatus.
Yes. Ooh. And so Obi-Wan goes, well, is there an antidote? And Molly's just like, you know me, I got your antidote right here, boy. And he's like, but it's going to cost you. So Obi-Wan just chucks him some credits into the air. He flips them, and then he tosses him the antidote, and they are off to the palace. So Obi-Wan
I'm not sure about this voice we're doing for Molly. I feel like we should...
Yeah, he was kind of like a crazy mad scientist, but he's a
right.
really peripheral character. It's not very important.
He's my king.
We're paraphrasing
never diss
people.
Molly in my presence.
Read the book, people. So anyway, Jono leads Obi-Wan back to the palace, and he says that there is the council members are the other council members know that Giba has gone mad with power, and they want to meet with Obi-Wan. And he leads him into a tower that he has never been into before. And Obi-Wan knows that he needs to get to the queen with this antidote. And he's asking Jono, hey, who had, is there anybody in the kitchen? I remember seeing this guy in the gardens with white eyes. Is he possibly somebody? And Jono's like, no, that's Vizo. He's one of the queen's staunchest supporters. And it's at this moment here that it dawns on him. Jono's family is from the sea. Jono delivers the queen's tea every night, and he turns to Jono and he says, Jono, it was you, wasn't it? And it's at this moment that, Jono, of course, he says, poison the queen? I could not do such a thing, Jono cried. It could have been anybody. But it wasn't, Obi-Wan said. It was you. Qui-Gon had often told Obi-Wan that he was not in touch with the living force, but now Obi-Wan could read his friend's guilt as clearly as a censor. He saw desperation and fear in Jono's eyes, and something else. Anger. He said nothing. He just kept his eyes on Jono. Suddenly, the mask of innocence dropped from Jono's face. And why shouldn't it be me? Jono asked softly. Thanks to you, Jedi, I was almost exiled from the palace. But kill the queen, Obi-Wan started slowly. Don't you understand, Obi-Wan? Jono cried. This is all I have. The Duns have been part of the royal family for generations. It's what I was trained for, bred for. The honor of my family depends on me. Jono threw out his hands pleadingly. The queen depends on you, Obi-Wan countered. Your job is to protect her. Jono's face flushed with anger. She would have turned me out into the streets, he said. Once Decabrun is elected, he will hire his people as servants. And where will I go? What will I do? Should I have become Should I have to become like everybody else? Yes, I am a servant, but I live in the palace. He flung that last word out proudly. Jono, Obi-Wan said sadly, I trusted you. The anger left Jono's face. Then you made a mistake, he said softly. You are my friend? I like you, Obi-Wan, but I guess I like living in the palace more.
Wow. This is shades of Revenge of the Sith right here.
I know, right? This turn is incredible. And it's at this moment Obi-Wan hears footsteps. He recognizes the footsteps of the very bald Jibba, who is clearly up to no good.
You think it's Jibba or Giba?
I don't know.
I feel like Jibba is a weird name. I feel like it has to be Giba, but I'm fine. We'll just go with God. That's fine.
Yeah. Read the book. So it's at this moment that Obi-Wan has no place to turn. He's going to be captured by the royal guards. Obi-Wan makes the choice. He jumps out of the tower window.
So he's jumping out of this tower, and he's able to use kind of the Force to help guide him down. He grabs some branches until he lands safely on the ground. But he's like, I still need to get a hold of the council, who know that Giba's no good. So he rushes to find the council chamber, and but then, he knows, he sees guards coming, so he kind of ducks into a room, and he hides in this room. And in this room happens to be Beiju, who's pissed, of course. And he challenges Obi-Wan to a real sword fight. This is a pretty cool sequence. So he's like, "Oh, you Jedi, you have the advantage because you're the only people who use the lightsaber, your own weapon. But are you a real sword fighter? Can you really hang with me?"
Can I read this one part real quick?
Of course, yes.
Where they explain what a sword is. It's a sword. It's a sword, Obi-Wan answered. He had never used the weapon, but he had seen drawings of one in the temple. It's like a lightsaber, only made of metal.
Oh, I love when Star Wars explains basic things that when everyone knows what they are. Anyway, that's an incredible moment. Thank you for noting that. Obi-Wan, he kind of struggles at first because a sword is heavier than a lightsaber. But he kind of starts to get the upper hand. They're fighting back and forth. And the fight is stopped by Vizo, who is a blind minister, and he tells Beiju that he's already lost, basically. So if you go to page 114, you'll see he just crushes Beiju here. This is a real big moment. Queen Vita has not lied to you, my prince, Vizo replied, serene in the face of Beiju's rudeness. But your father did. Giba did. The men you worshipped lied to you. The mother who bore you did not. Get out! The prince screamed. I will have the guards throw you in jail for your lies. Then you will have to prove that I lie. Don't you want to see my proof first? Are you brave enough to face it? Vizo asked in the same calm tone. Obi-Wan looked at Beiju. He saw that the prince could not back down. Vizo had maneuvered him into a corner as surely as Obi-Wan had in battle. Fine, old man, the prince sneered. Show me what you call proof, and then I will have the great satisfaction of throwing you in the tower jail. So, at this point, he convinces Vizo to show him proof, and he directs him into this chamber. It's this blank room, this kind of plain-looking room, and he tells Beiju to stand on a blue stone in the middle of the room. And so he does it, and the room lights up. And it's all these shining lights and everything, and ultimately nothing really happens. There's no reveal. And Vizo explains, the mark of the crown is not on you. You are not the true heir. And Beiju, Obi-Wan expects Beiju to be angry, and to say, you're lying, this is a farce. But Beiju's not angry. He falls to his knees and he starts crying. And Vizo leaves the room and basically leaves Obi-Wan to console Beiju.
Yes. And I want to go back real quick, and this has nothing to do with the book itself, but it must be the editor of the book here. Go to page 110 and 111. There are wrong words and spelling errors on these pages. Prince Beiju held up a sword and then slashed downward at a tapestry. The fabric was rent in two.
Well,
R-E-N-T.
I'm not sure about rent being an issue. I think I've heard that word used in a similar context before.
Okay,
it's more
all
of
right.
an old-fashioned thing. I'm not positive about that, but...
Okay, we'll have to look into that. And then on page 111 here, he kept his mind focused on the battle. He could not let the prince's jibes get under his skin.
Wait, let me
jabs?
see.
It's like...
jibes. I don't know. I don't know if those would be...
Okay, maybe I'm
positive.
foolish.
I think it's a reasonable thing to point out, but I'm not positive about that.
All right.
I will use your phrase, read the book, people, and let us know.
So yeah, Obi-Wan is left to console Beiju. And Beiju is sitting on the floor, his arms wrapped around his knees. He is crying. And Obi-Wan, who's just like, shit, like, I wish Qui-Gon was here to deal with this. I do not have the personality to deal with this. But he's just like, I don't even care for this guy, but now I gotta console him. So he leans down next to Beiju and he says, my Jedi training tells me to absorb a blow is to begin to recover from it.
Ugh.
Now you must decide what is best for you to do. Do you want to rule Gala as prince? He did not expect the prince to answer, but Beiju raised his head. He fixed his reddened eyes on Obi-Wan, the traces of tears still on his face. I don't know what I want anymore, he whispered. I don't know anything. You are still prince, Obi-Wan pointed out. Elon does not want to rule. Until the elections, you are the queen's rightful heir, so you have an opportunity. You can act like a prince. You can rescue your mother and imprison Giba. If you are voted down by the people, you can leave a government that is still functioning and strong. And here it is revealed that Giba told Beiju that obviously the people love the monarchy and that they were going to vote for him. But when Prince Beiju walked through the streets, he could see the truth in people's eyes that they did not care for him, that he was going to lose. And he knows that Giba just wants to maintain power. So all of a sudden they hear the sounds of shouting in the streets. And Obi-Wan springs over to the window, and they see hundreds, maybe thousands of people heading down the hill into Gala. Some of them were on swoops. And they herded a battalion of the Royal Guard as they marched between them. The hill people have arrived for the elections. Qui-Gon is back.
So, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, they reunite. They catch up with each other about what's been going on. And they go into the throne room, and Beiju is there, and he's saying, oh, did you bring Elan? Who he knows now is his half-sister. And Qui-Gon's like, oh no, she went to visit Willa Promi. If you remember, that's the one of the candidates for governor. And Beiju says, well, I've issued an arrest warrant for Giba. And Giba pops in and he's like, you can't do that. You're not the true ruler. Your mother still is, and she's incapacitated. But then Queen Vita shows right up, and she's leaning into the doorway. She looks weak, but she's standing, and she orders his arrest. And Giba then, all caution to the wind, he pulls out Obi-Wan's lightsaber from his robes that was confiscated, and he tries to attack Qui-Gon, who very swiftly dodges his clumsy attack and just cuts the homie's hand off. Just done. He's done. Disarmed, done. Nice try. So, Jono then kind of shows up, and he's just like, and he's saying, he tells everyone about Giba help facilitating the off-world funding of Deca Brun's campaign, and so the Queen is just like, come on, let's move on with this. Arrest this dude. And dude gets arrested, and there's a moment here on the last page of the chapter when I apologize. Fuck, I just had this open. And so, the Queen says, starting here on page 124, "It's over," the Queen said. Beiju crossed to her. He slid an arm around her shoulder, supporting her. "Except for the voting," he said. "Let the people decide." The great theme of the prequel era, democracy,
Yes.
and its failings and its triumphs.
I also want to say, too, so Obi-Wan cuts Giba's hand off, and after, on page 124, right above where you said, the guards slipped electro cuffs on Giba's wrist and he was led away. He only has one hand.
Yeah, it would not be hard for him to escape that. Whatever. These books were written very fast, as I said. I think they were released basically every other month.
Yeah.
That's a quick turnaround.
So anyway, the elections go over without a hitch, and Willa Prami is voted governor of Gala by an overwhelming margin. Prince Beiju dropped out of the election and announced his support for Willa, and then as soon as word got out that Deca was involved with Offworld, he was done. So we end here.
That's quick for the word to get around in less than one day. But,
yeah, I know, right? Crazy. So we end here where Qui-Gon is having his final meeting with the Queen, and she says here, "I have been granted something unique, Qui-Gon, something I did not expect," she said. "I will be alive to see my legacy play out. Beiju will find a better life." She gave a rueful smile. "He doesn't realize it quite yet, but I have no doubt of it. Gala will be free and at peace." And here we learn that Elon has gone back to the mountains, but she has an agreement forged a bond with Willa Prami, and she will not isolate herself so much too. And we find out here what happened to Jono. The Queen here says, "Even though Jono betrayed us," the Queen said, "it is good for all of us to forgive. Jono will be punished, or at least the boy will see it as punishment. He will be sent back to his family, and he will learn farming. He will be like everybody else now." So even Jono, who tried to kill the Queen, he doesn't get it that bad. So happy endings all around.
And there's a really great moment. There's a final moment, a final tie-up of all this legacy talk with Qui-Gon, and there's another one with Obi-Wan, and I want to read the Qui-Gon part here, and you can read the Obi-Wan part.
Okay, that works.
On page 128, for the first time since he'd landed on Gala, resolution beat again inside him, steady and strong. As a Jedi, he left behind justice and honor. It didn't matter if his footsteps would disappear, or if years from now no one on Gala remembered that 2 Jedi had helped to ensure a peaceful transition for their planet. They would remember peace, and that was enough. And he had Obi-Wan. With every mission, he was more convinced that his Padawan would become extraordinary, even among the Jedi. What he taught would live on. That was legacy enough. And certainly, there were still more legacies to be found.
So Obi-Wan while this is going on, Obi-Wan accompanies Elon and Beiju and Vizo, who leads them back into the chamber, and he has Elon stand on the blue stone. We see the dazzling light show again, but this time it results in the shadow of a crown being cast on Elon's chest. She has the true mark of the crown. She is the true heir to the throne. And it's at this moment that she says, the last princess, she says, and Vizo turned to Beiju. May I escort you back to the chamber, my prince? And Beiju swallowed. He shook his head. My name is Beiju. Elin smiled and held out her hand. Come, brother, let's walk together. So this is a nice moment. We have Beiju, who is accepting the fact that he is himself, and here we have what Obi-Wan's wrap up to this theme of legacy. And I'm just going to finish out the book here. Elon and Beiju both changed their whole notions of what was left to them by their parents. They had both forged a new path, taking up a legacy based on their characters, not their position. That, Obi-Wan decided, was the true mark of greatness. He, too, was on a path that he had not foreseen. The Jedi Code was as much a part of him as the Tala heritage was to Elon and Beiju. His ties were no less important. He found something unexpected on this mission. Obi-Wan realized he had a renewed sense of purpose. When he turned, he found Qui-Gon standing in the doorway, waiting. He wished he could tell Qui-Gon about his renewed commitment, about the questions he had struggled with while Qui-Gon was away, questions about his legacy and what that meant. But his master seemed so stern. Obi-Wan knew that Qui-Gon was already anxious to depart. Their next mission awaited them. Qui-Gon would be able to tell Obi-Wan that they needed to focus on that. Ahead lay new questions, new struggles, always more questions than answers. Always more questions than answers there are, Yoda had said. Qui-Gon interrupted Obi-Wan's thoughts. It's time to go, he said. Obi-Wan nodded. I am ready. Another amazing entry in the Jedi Apprentice series.
This is, I know we're saying it basically every book. This is the best one yet. They keep getting better. This book... I just thought this was probably, and I like to explain myself a little more. This book is it's the most elegant structurally there's been. We talked about kind of one little shortcut we were talking about, with mind trick and stuff. But this book has the fewest of those, which is kind of unfortunately a feature of any book that's limited to this kind of page count. But just there's a lot of. There's just a real elegance at the core theme that we've been talking about, a legacy and kind of what you contribute to the world, how you help people, and if you're remembered for it or not, is very elegantly weaved throughout the book, through all the characters. All the characters have a different angle on that theme, and it's a really great book, honestly. It's one of the better. It's not just the best book we've read for this podcast. It's one of the better Star Wars books I've read. Period. I mean, across age groupings or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's a great book. I don't know. It's our rating system, which is still a little vague, but I don't know. I may be going very far with this one. What are your final thoughts here?
All right. I'm going to say, we've praised this book. The only two things that have kind of, you were more bothered by the force, the Jedi mind trick through the freezer wall. That doesn't bother me so much. The part that I felt was kind of vague was the actual mark of the crown thing. I don't understand how the process works. You stand on a brick and there's a dazzling light show that somehow determines that you are the true heir to the throne. Yeah, this seems like an odd thing to exist only for people of the royal heritage. It's not explained at all. I question why she went with that, because it's just like, you could have done anything else. The only reason that seems like is a thing is because like somebody told her the book needed to be called Mark of the Crown. I don't know. That's my only problem with this book, but I'm going to go ahead and give this book a 10. This is another Yoda book. This is an amazing book, and I am still not just ready to claim that this book is conceived in midi-chlorians.
Yeah,
that's my rating.
I think you've convinced me. The Mark of the Crown thing, that we didn't really talk much about it in the meat of the episode, but it is a very vague idea, and also, I gotta say, the cover makes me think that Qui-Gon's got the Mark of the Crown.
I know, right?
And he doesn't, and that's a disappointment, so I gotta not quite give it the conceived in midi-chlorians, but it's a great book, and for all the reasons we've talked about, and I gotta give it a 10. It's a Yoda for sure. For sure it's a Yoda. So, wrapping the show up, we normally have a few segments. We don't have any mail this week. But we do have a Wikipedia fun thing. Whatever we're calling this segment, we still aren't really. Do we have one? Do we have a name for this segment?
Yeah. There's a drop. I've sent it to you.
Okay, well we'll put that drop in.
Play the drop.
We're gonna put the drop in right now.
I like that Wikipedia.
And we're back. So I was looking up some characters and ideas from this book on Wikipedia, and I looked up Elan, and there's some interesting things here. I looked up Elan, and once I got to her page, and I'll explain that in a second, because it wasn't the first page that showed up. She only appears in this book. She doesn't come back at any point, so there's not like any really thing beyond what we've already talked about with her. But what's interesting is, in the Legends timeline, the original Star Wars Expanded Universe, there are no less than 5 characters who go by some form of the name Elan.
Really?
Yes, and I thought I just kind of run them down quickly. I'm not going to read whole entries or anything, but I think it's interesting. There's the Elan from this book, a Galatian, and a hill person. The one that it redirected me to was Elan, who was a Yuzong Vong priestess, who was young at the start of the invasion, and by Yuzong Vong standards, she was devastatingly beautiful, with ice blue eyes and intricately patterned lavender and maroon markings on her face. And she appears in several New Jedi Order books. If you don't know the Yuzong Vong, they're a weird alien bug people race or something. I don't fucking know. I never liked those
Nobody
books
likes it
all that much. So, anyway, also, there is Elan Sabagano, who... Elan Sleazebagano, you might know him more as. He sold some death sticks to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Can you believe it? That guy, he's Elan also. That's his first name. I just remember Sleazebagano. It says on Wikipedia here, Sel Sabagno. No, did they change his name or something in Legend, in like the new canon?
I don't know. I hope they didn't.
Yeah, Elan Sel Sabagno, also known as Elan Sleazebagano.
It's Sleazebagano.
It's Sleazebagano. Let's relax, Disney. Let some sleazebags exist. Anyway, there's character, what's his name here? Yoshi Rafe Elan, and he only ever appears in the Dark Horse Comics Star Wars No Subtitle number 27 from 2001, and it looks like he's a Yoda. He's a Jedi Yoshi Rafe Elan. So, he was created by Doug Petrie, who wrote for Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Interesting factoid. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, and then finally, the pod racer Cam Nall was a Flugrian. He's a professional pod racer. And, he shows up in Clone Wars a little bit, but he goes under the alias, in some story, he goes under the alias Elan Mox. So there you go, 5 Elans in the Star Wars world, and I thought that was fun. I like when it's just like, obviously these things all came over the course of many decades and different storytelling initiatives, and these are the fun things you can find in the depths of Wikipedia.
Right.
So,
so one thing that I want to wrap this up with is, so we have this whole theme of legacy in these books, and you had sent me something recently from Ewan McGregor, and I think this ties in perfectly with legacies. This is a quote that Obi-Wan was recently quoted as, I guess, and I'm going to read this whole thing here.
Let me give the full context here. This is from Vanity Fair. They did a list of the top 30 or top 25 scenes. It's the top 25 most influential movies of the last 25 years or something like that, or movie scenes of the last 25 years. And one of the scenes on the list was the, you were my brother Anakin scene from Revenge of the Sith. And in this feature, they interviewed people involved in each scene and had a little thing, and this is where that's from.
So this is Ewan. Episode 3 was all green screen. They had us on green disc on a green floor with a green background and a guy on the floor rotating us like chickens as we lunged at each other with lightsabers. What keeps you emotionally grounded is the other actor. Episode 2, I was on my own, speaking to thin air, but this scene was harrowing for Obi-Wan. I lose Anakin, and we see the danger of what might lead into episodes 4, 5, and 6. For all my moaning about green screen, I did enjoy playing Obi-Wan and this link to Alec Guinness. George wanted to do something very different with the prequels. That's why people felt cheated. It was upsetting when people would laugh and joke about it. Now, many years later, the prequels meant a lot to a generation that were kids then. So from smirking to cynical opinions, now I'm getting feedback from children that they were made feedback from the children that they were made for. I'm really happy about that.
Oh God, I love Ewan. He seems like, it makes me happy that I don't know. He's always represented Star Wars so well, and he represents, to some, like we've talked about, we got into Star Wars before the prequels, and those are, our favorite movies by and large are the original trilogy, like everybody. But our Star Wars, that was the Star Wars that was coming out that we were most excited about during our formative years. He is, in a lot of ways, our Obi-Wan. That's no shots at Alec Guinness. We love Alec Guinness, but to see him still this many years later, anytime he's asked about it, he never seems annoyed. He's always so happy to talk about Star Wars, and that is it's a beautiful quote. And I sent it to you, and I was very touched by it, and I'm glad you were also.
Yes. This is, it's so great that he acknowledges that, people, he's heard the bad feedback, but now it's 20 years later, it's coming around, and he is just these children are vocalizing what he means to them, and that is really, really touching him, and that is just really beautiful. And he is more than gung-ho to play Obi-Wan again, and I'm very happy about that, and I hope we see him as Obi-Wan again. He's amazing. Love Ewan.
So, with that, we're going to wrap up this week on Padawan Library. Next week, we'll be discussing the 5th book in the Jedi Apprentice series, Defenders of the Dead, also by Jude Watson, our queen. So, anyway, so we will be back next week with that, but in the meantime, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Padawan Library, like us on Facebook. We're thinking about maybe starting up a group at some point, for discussion, because the Facebook pages are kind of difficult for discussion. but we'll
Yes.
talk. We'll figure that out. Hopefully, we can get some fans involved on that level. But please share the episode, rate and review the show on iTunes, all that crap. Subscribe, all that stuff.
Do
YouTube,
everything
we
you
got a
can to
YouTube
support.
page. There's going to be something for you guys next week on that YouTube page besides just the audio of our episodes. So
yes, so a video element. Very exciting. Join the book club, and as always, may the Force be with you.
And the library is closed. I don't know. We have too many outgoing lines. We have to finalize one.
I like the library's closed.
Yeah,
but
I like
well, here's the thing. I want to discuss this on air. I've decided what our characters are. So we are assistant librarians because at age 13 we were not picked up as Padawan. So we were assigned Jedi jobs, and we were assigned to be librarians at the same time. And me and you are constantly competing because we know one day the head librarian, Jocasta Nu, will die, and one of us will take her place. So that's the story of Padawan Library.
All right. Well, we'll build out this mythology forever and ever. We'll see you guys next week.
Padawan Library is hosted and produced by Tim May and Levi Peretic. It is edited by Tim May. Our theme song is by The Astral Project. Our artwork is by Freddie Funbuns. Padawan Library is copyright 2019 by Tim May and Levi Peretic. All rights reserved.